Welcome to The Lost Signals Discusses Film and TV. Using the revolutionary Manzur-Ramosi Thurlow scale,
or MONS,
we scrupulously review these art forms with an emphasis on narrative structure. Join us for another entertaining episode.
Hello, and welcome to The Lost Signals Reviews, Film and Television. My name is Chris Morgan. I am here with Stephen Ramosi.
How you guys doing?
Jonathan Ian Manzer.
Shit.
And Scott Thurlow.
Right on.
And today we are reviewing a Spike Lee joint, Da 5 Bloods, which is currently on Netflix. We all watched it, and we're about to talk about it. And Scott, do you have a log line for us?
Yeah, of course. We 5 Bloods be stealing the gold, be reclaiming the gold.
Yes, I was going to bring up how close this is to Three Kings, and that's perfect.
I, sadly enough to say, I haven't seen
Weak.
3 Kings.
It's good.
It's very good.
Trust me, it makes sense.
Yeah.
That was that Spike Jonze movie?
I don't remember who directed it, but it was back in the day. It was like mid-90s, but yeah, it's
Look at
us up.
All right,
Yeah.
well, it's not important. But anyway, let's kick this off with Ian. Would you like to talk about the plot, please?
In Three Kings meets Grumpy Old Men. 4 buddies from Vietnam who fought in the war together go to find some discarded gold that they buried in Vietnam from the war, and all the troubles they both brought back with them to the U.S. and those that they
follow them.
leave behind in Vietnam, and they end up claiming the gold, but they're really the legacy of U.S. imperialism screws everybody over, and that's the plot of this. But it's really a narrative for the messages that I think Spike Lee wants to bring across, and overall, it's an entertaining tale. But it's actually for as powerful as this film is, it's not about the narrative. The narrative itself is a fairly simple, like almost like
You've
a
seen
treasure
it
hunt
kind of
type,
before, yeah.
like a hardcore version of Romancing the Stone or something like that. Like, but so I'm giving it a overall a strong 2, because I think that, and I've done this before, where the first half of this movie is very, very powerful and a very great exploration of these characters. And the second half I felt is good, but doesn't live up to the power of the first half. And it's punished by its own
The strength of its
strength. Yeah. So
It's kind of like the plot got in the way.
I could
they couldn't end it any other way in a weird way.
Like a really
But-
strong character piece. I thought it started strong, and I thought the final ending was strong. But I agree with you. It got, once it became, for lack of a better term, a heist film.
Yeah.
That's where it was his weakest, because the strength in the beginning and at the end, the tail end, was so character strong. And then, like I said, it kind of got lost once we hit the like I said, it's not quite a heist plot, but that's why I say, like, I think that plot got in the way of the narrative in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think that there is I think you're absolutely right, a strong 2 on the plot. Like, there's a good through line going through this, but it gets a little mushy at points. And there are certain parts where it's like highly telegraphed what's going to happen. Like the
yeah, I know what you mean.
Chekhov's landmine?
Yeah, Chekhov's landmine. I was literally going to use that exact term, and it's so, like, I actually thought it was going to go off a little bit earlier than it does, but when
someone starts backing up, and that a landmine's about to go off,
and he just does it for so long, you're like, this is definitely, he's going to step on a land. But like, so yeah, so there are points of this that are kind of like eye rolling.
Predictable, I guess.
Plot points in order just literally only to move the plot forward and not serving the greater story outside of that. However, I think for the most part, it's pretty good. And as you mentioned, really powerful. By the way, Three Kings, David O. Russell of like American Hustle, Silver Linings fame, did Three Kings. So
Okay, sure. Say the Lynch.
But no, that was the thing is because when they met that Minesweeping group, I was a little worried. I wasn't sure how they're going to fit in. But as soon as he started talking, I'm like, if he steps on a landmine, it's going to become a different movie than the one. Like, I was more interested in seeing the movie continue without stepping into the landmine.
There was no way someone wasn't stepping a landmine in this movie.
I
Like,
was more interested in. I was much more interested in the characters than the plot with the gold and the double cross and so forth.
sure. So it's tough because like I was going into it looking at a 3, but like now that you guys like talked it out a bit, like I think it's a very strong 2, like a 2.5, like Chris, like 2.75 or something like that. Like it's just not quite enough. It's a very strong narrative, but I think whatever points, like the point that I'm going to maybe like agree with you guys with and take away here, I'm going to ship to like themes or style or something like that. But yeah, it's a very perfectly fine and you know what, more than fine really plot. But sometimes it's sort of like it almost possibly buckles under its own weight, but doesn't quite do that.
All right, I'm actually going to reframe it from that. I think it's a fine script that was elevated by the director, and
Agreed.
wanted its own flair to it. But it under a different director, maybe under an Oliver Stone, it would have been a serviceable
Sure.
Vietnam treasure hunt movie. But it was elevated from that.
Yeah,
So,
I think that's correct. So, like, at the end of the day, I think I'll agree with you boys and, like, give it a very strong 2, just not quite enough for a 3. But I was possibly coming into it with giving it a 3. But now having talked it out, yeah, that's where I'll decide.
Yeah, I think so. That's 2s all around, right?
Yep.
All right, cool.
Okay, so we're moving on with Scott with themes.
So I'll just lead off. Like, I mean, there's a lot of, like, you mentioned the through line, Steve-O. There's a lot of things going on with this movie, like that address a number of very important issues for sure, especially given the current climate of our actual times. But yeah, I think it's just like, I don't know, man. Like it's like half a Vietnam movie, right? Like literally half of it is shot as if it were a Vietnam movie, like a flashback, and then going to the present times of the survivors, like who are like probably about 60, 70 years old or so, and like addressing racial issues, like how black people were like treated and also deployed, if you will, in the actual war, and just like having their bond and like having sort of like almost a mythological like leaders, at least figurehead in Chadwick's character, who is only appears in flashbacks, right? And then of course I don't want to say devolves, it also morphs into, I guess I'll say, right? Like when they find the gold, then it becomes like, again, the classic, like, oh,
it doesn't matter what race you are. Green is the
exactly
is the color that
they literally say that in the movie. Yeah.
No, you're right. Like for sure. So like that's not, I want to say thrown in there, but it is incorporated in there as well. So like I think it is a good job of like weaving between these like 2 or 3 like very strong themes that like come in and out, like that are exemplified by the characters, which we'll get into in a second as well. But yeah, I mean, of course I'm giving themes a 1, and I think Spike Lee like did a good job, knew what he wanted to do with, again, like sort of pinpointing those, highlighting those elements, highlighting those thematic things like here and there throughout the movie, without like necessarily like overbearing one over another, right? They're just all like well woven. So yeah, I'm that's what I'm looking at starting out with, and probably giving a pretty strong 1. And if you guys have anything else to point out or to delve into more, do so now, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're right. It does do a very strong job of that. I think that one of the most thematically and even like character wise strong scenes is the scene where they find out that Martin Luther King died, and they have this like I think that's probably my favorite scene in the movie, actually, where they have this like really powerful moment of like trying to figure out their feelings about this while they're stuck overseas and while people are struggling against racism at home, and they're stuck fighting for this country that is completely divided at the time. Like what a amazing scene that
was divided at the time. It still is.
Well, yes, but But at that time,
Sure.
you know, you have this like really important figure that dies, and then these guys are stuck overseas fighting for the cause of the people that killed him, ostensibly, right? And you have Chadwick Boseman's character, you know, Storm and Norman, trying to keep them together as they're all like
In the face of that, yeah.
struggling through their own. Like I really thought that was probably the most powerful and probably my favorite scene in the movie, and really like distilled all of the feelings that everybody had, you know, while they were in the war, like in the flashbacks about this, and then the feelings that you still see them struggling with later on as they go back.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think like I think that's just like a really important point to focus on for this one. You have that, you have the theme of greed as well, you know, like the theme of what does greed do to these people that or like brothers in war, and like, you know, eventually they kind of split up because of because of the scars that war left them with, you know, like because of all that. So like I think there's a lot going in this movie. I think that Spike Lee really kind of swung for the fences in terms of themes on this.
Yeah.
And for the most part, he nailed them. I think a couple times it was like a little bit like, well, I don't know, but like for the most part, I think he nailed it.
Few and far between.
Well, there's one point I want to bring up, and it's actually, I think, another example of where the script gets in the way of the movie that Spike Lee was trying to make. So there's a quote I'm going to butcher here, but I love it, where it goes, not only does America go in to invade a country and kill its people, but then it rubs salt in the wound by sending in cameramen to go in a decade later to talk about the struggles of its soldiers that were inflicted upon them while they're killing your people. And I feel that this one did one of the best jobs of actually portraying a realistic Vietnam for the first half of this. They showed the scars left in Vietnam on several different individuals, and you saw, and then they become the generic henchmen of a corrupt, greedy Frenchman. So they kind of they wipe away
It's like a
most
slow
of
roll,
the
kind of.
character building of an entire culture to turn them into generic villains at the end, and then kind of at the very end bring it slightly back with the idea of when they're confronting him, the thing being like, you killed my brothers, and that how the war never ends.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought that was at least in the first half, the touches of actually exploring the repercussions to Vietnam, and touches like the American War is what actually the Vietnamese call it. We're the only ones who call it the Vietnam
True.
War.
I mean, that's a subtle but important thing. Yeah.
But it's like, you know, even in that scene where he calls it the American War, I think all the guys say like the American War is over, you know, like they're using that terminology as well. Like, you know, the Bloods are using that terminology as well. If you know, if I may call them that, if I may call them the Bloods.
You better not.
I mean, they call themselves that. So yeah.
And also, I'm a big actually proponent of supporting those that actually try to get landmines out of countries, because around the world, that's actually a huge problem that most people don't even consider as an issue. Anyway.
Absolutely. But
built to last. Landmines are fucking built to last. You can't get your car to last more than a few years, but a fucking landmine.
American military, Chris. You know, exactly.
Well, by the way, I purposely kept quiet because I've got a rant saved. So first of all, because there's racial components to this, and Spike Lee does a great job really putting everything in context. I'd be remiss if I didn't say we were. If I would be remiss if I wasn't not to mention that we were recording this on Juneteenth, which I don't. It's not directly applicable in one way, but it's completely directly applicable in another way. But one of the
necessarily plan that, but it does sort of like add something.
But what I really want to get into, and I was talking about this with Scott and Ian precast during Whiskey Hour. The Spike Lee once again knocks it out of the park by using footage from the time. And there's so much stuff that you don't want to see that he shows you right off the bat, like that a person getting shot in the head and the camera's moving. You can see. I mean, that's
Burnt children,
Yeah,
things
no
like
doubt.
that.
Like,
It's
I was gonna say that for
you know,
style, Chris.
fucking things that happen, and they talk about him later in the movie, and he shows you right up front what the fuck is happening. But one of the things he does spectacularly in this movie that rarely do we ever fucking see when it comes to war movies, because I'm gonna fucking say it. The United States are really big on our soldiers. We all love our servicemen, but we do dick all when they come home. Those men had PTSD. The people, everybody has PTSD from war. These things are never fucking addressed. The United States, no government in the world takes care of its soldiers. They fucking have wars all over the goddamn place. Nobody ever fucking cleans up after their messes. They never take care of the people. Oh yeah, we praise them when they come home, but goddamn it, you know, we don't do anything to help them reintegrate into society. You know, you teach folks to go out there, and you go out there and you kill for a country, and you're fed well this Yankee Doodle nationalistic bullshit to get people out there. You say, you give that whole unity messages to the country, and they're an enemy of our country, and blah 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 blah. And meanwhile, there are real people out there dying. There are people out there being killed by soldiers being killed by other people, because there's a lot of guerrilla tactics. So it wasn't just soldiers killing soldiers. I mean, there was a lot. I mean, war is just a motherfucking ugly thing. And I don't care how you cut it. I don't care what it is. I don't care if you've got an exit strategy or a goal to hit. You better, if you're going to go fucking in there, you better have a fucking clear reason, and you better not pull the bullshit on it. Because when that scene happened, where the one guy who had no leg, when he was asking for money, he dropped the fireworks and watched all four of those guys drop to the ground, freaking out. I fucking lost my mind, because one of the things around here is we've got all sorts of fucking fireworks going around, and we've got the technology now to actually have silent fireworks and ones that don't hurt the fucking atmosphere, and that is a concern. We've got like there's mental health issues related to war, and Spike Lee, god damn, did he nail that right. If he did nothing else thematically right, he nailed that so right on the money, because because in this country, as with most countries, and I'm going on a rant because I've been fired up all day about this, that people overlook mental health. It is the George W. Bush administration coming back from the war, they turned it into a game of semantics. Is it PTSD? Is it shell shock? I mean, people are dying for their country. They are scarred irreparably, and nobody does fucking shit about it. And all these fucking movies, they talk about it and they glorify our soldiers, but they don't really ever fucking show this shit. And Spike Lee, goddamn it, right off the bat, he shows fucking firecrackers being thrown on the ground, and these guys hating the fucking dirt said so much more than any one of these goddamn Yankee Doodle movies that they fucking put out there. People like Spike Lee should be making these goddamn movies. And and Oliver Stone too. I never want to see Platoon again as long as I live, because Platoon was a fucking hard-ass movie to watch. Platoon was a real, this was a fucking real movie. Spike Lee, goddamn it, nailed it right on the money. Like I said, this is one of the things that I'm adamant about how countries do and do not take care of our soldiers. I mean, we're all great when it comes to pissing in the wind when it comes to nationalism. Everybody wants to claim over our service people who out there, and we never take care of these people. We never take care of them. And praise Spike Lee for fucking pointing that out. And I'm not apologizing for this rap, because I'm fucking fired up about this shit.
And you're absolutely 100% correct about 100%,
that. Buddy, yeah.
Cheers, sir.
I'm with you.
That's a hell of a. That's one of our most impressive rants that we've had on this show, I think.
But no, I think you're absolutely right, and yeah, I think Spike Lee captured it extremely well, as you said, Chris. And so I think all that is evidence. Like, your rant was spot on, and I'm gonna give it a pretty fucking strong 1.
Yeah,
for sure. No,
it's absolutely spot on, I think. No. And I'll give you much credit for that. So I think it's ones all around, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
And I don't know what this did to our audio levels, but
we'll fix it in post. Don't worry about it.
Figure it out.
Yeah.
Post, because I was sitting on that all day long.
I feel you.
Absolutely.
No, all good.
We're coming up on like 4th of July and all that stuff. It's just
It's legit, man. Yeah, for sure.
anyway. So it's Steve-O. Would you like to talk about the antagonist?
Sure. This is an interesting question
Mm-hmm.
because I don't know. I mean, I guess like Americanism almost like the. So for the Bloods, right? Except for I guess if I don't know if you count David as one of them, but like for the original Bloods,
I do.
For the original Bloods, I would say that their biggest antagonist is their kind of ghosts of the war, and that's why you get all these. That's why you get all these flashbacks that, and specifically for Delroy or Delroy for Paul, for Delroy Lindo's character, you have this like never ending PTSD. Like obviously like they all the guys keep telling him like we're all feeling that, we all see ghosts, we all get that, but obviously he's the one that's feeling it the most, and the one that's like least able to handle it. And you find out towards the end of the movie kind of why, because he actually killed his friend and like the person that he looked up to the most accidentally, but it's still on him, and he's never talked to
Friendly
anybody.
fire is still fire.
Yeah, exactly. And he's never talked to anybody or tried to like work out his own feelings other than within his own self. It's kind of just been eating at him for however many years. So and I think that all these guys have their own like personal demons, but I think that his are the most obvious, and like that's his big antagonist.
The most prevalent, yeah.
Right? I think for everybody else, like at certain points, Paul is almost their antagonist because he's like stopping them from just having an easy go at, or not an easy go, but like a much easier go than it could have been, right? Like his, PTSD really, really, really like digs itself in and like kind of screws him over at a lot of points. I don't necessarily want to call him an antagonist, but like his problems are kind of their antagonist at a point in this movie, which is like an interesting angle that I was thinking of this in terms of. So, I mean, I think that it's all a pretty solid in terms of what the antagonist is, but at times it can feel almost like not graspable, like what they're really, like intangible. That's probably a word I should have thought of. But like what they're really like battling against. You can feel the battle the entire time, but like there are times where you don't really know what it is,
Well, what's funny is I think in the original script and in the hands of a lesser director, Jean Reno's the antagonist of this.
Right.
But because of the performances and because of the direction, it's elevated from a very one-dimensional villain in Jean Reno to a indictment of American imperialism and the wake that it leaves not only in other countries but among its own citizenry. And I have to say, I agree with you, Steve, that that's a very strong, a very complex antagonist.
Yeah, I mean, it's really well said. On much more to add, but I think it all adds up. Like you said, Steve, on the surface, it's as if Paul is like somehow like about halfway, maybe even a third of the way through, turns into an antagonist. But I think it's more exemplary of like a mindset or like a greater idea, like versus him himself. Like it goes back to the greed thing we were saying about themes as well. Like it's all like sort of thrown in there, and that they're dealing with all this stuff at the same time, like both in the flashbacks and in the present time.
Well, the greed doesn't really apply here because Paul didn't actually care about the money. He cared about what he felt he had lost throughout his life to the war and to the system that kept repressing him. And this was something that was even when he had it, it wasn't real to him, because the minute it was out of reach, he gave up on it.
Yeah, it was both somehow at once. I guess I want to say, yeah.
Because initially the the plane that was carrying the gold. The gold was supposed to go to
CIA cache, I believe they said.
yeah, it was a CIA cache, and they decided to take it because they're getting shit all out of the war because everything we've mentioned thus far. So I think war, American imperialism, PTSD. It's all because of this fucking war. Everything that's antagonizing him from the gold itself. There, like you were saying before, there is no greed. They saw it as reparations, and they're not. And I'm not saying that. I'm not laughing at that. I'm laughing with frustration because goddamn credit to Spike Lee is he's phenomenal and the gravitas that every little component of this has. Well, until we get to the two-dimensional villain, the gravitas of the situation, the antagonist is around them all the time, and even when they were not in Vietnam, the antagonist was around them. When they return, it's back around them. None of these characters have ever been without that antagonist. And that includes David too, because, his dad in some way never forgave him for the death of his mother, which is very Dickensy.
Almost the character of David has his own PTSD scars in a sense,
Yeah.
even though if he wasn't part of, obviously wasn't in Vietnam, but he still feels the ramifications of it. So, yeah, it's just a final coda, if you will, that because of that, there's many subtleties to the antagonist, but I think they all add together to make it an effective thing, even if there's not necessarily one overarching point that you can point to that says here's the antagonist, right? It's all a messy conglomerate because that's how life is, and that's how it relates to the experience of being in war and in their situation. So, yeah. Giving it a 1.
So it's ones all around then?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's to me with protagonist, and I am trying to decide if there's 4 or 5 protagonists in this. One wants to say Delroy Lindo, but he's only part of the story. I feel like this is a relay throughout the film.
I mean, it's an ensemble piece.
Yeah, it's totally an ensemble piece. And my only is 6. Okay, so you're gonna all right, because that was the other thing is are we gonna count? All right, so 5 if we're gonna count Norman, and 6 if we're gonna count David. Or actually, I was wondering if we were gonna count David as the 5th, and then if we should count Norman as the 6th, because he is kind of even 40, 50 years later, he is still the
he's the specter.
He's the impetus of everything.
he's the North Star for everybody. So yeah, I'm gonna definitely say it's an ensemble piece. I don't think the story in its entirety could have been told without any one of these people, because they all provided different dimensions to everything. Basically, I think he was able to have the characters cover different aspects of their various journey without tokenism. Here is the person who went to college. Here is the person who went to McDonald's. I mean, you obviously had one guy that was successful doing cars, and you had one guy.
But not really.
Even that was subverted, if you remember. Yeah.
It wasn't like some. I'm gonna just shit on this movie. It's not like a Big Chill kind of thing. Any of you had to endure that. I mean, growing up in the '80s, it's a boomer film.
Big Choking, exactly. Go fuck yourself, Chris. I agree.
But it's a boomer film, and it was on all the fucking time. And it was just tokenism. It was just we need a slice of life. This person from a slice of life, and this person from a slice of life. And that wasn't like this. It's like their home lives were
they're actual characters and people. You're saying?
Yeah, I'm sorry. They're actual characters and people, and not just these little boxes to check off and for the audience to identify with, because boomer.
I actually I think there's 2 protagonists to this.
Really?
Father and son. And it probably partly because of the performance of Paul. What's this actor's name?
Delroy Lindo.
Yeah,
Delroy.
because he just killed it in this. But it's really his and his son's story, I think. And every other character is fully fleshed out, but I happen to think that like the trajectory of the plot line and the performance is elevated to be a son actually like reconnecting with his father in the worst circumstances possible, and actually finally becoming understanding who his father was. And even though I don't think the son himself would hold weight as the protagonist of this, or because of the focus on the father there, I think that the weight of their arcs really carry the work.
It's tough because that's true of the latter half of the film. I won't argue there, but I think the first half like does focus upon like the actual like the titular bloods, if you will, like, and I think it gives them equal time to shine and like again, like you said, Chris, like to be fleshed out as actual people, actual characters, versus just being like some.
But I feel the only one that really fleshed out was the one who had the lover and the daughter in Vietnam.
Yeah, no,
because that had
I see what you mean.
secondary plot line of this. But the car salesman really didn't have any growth and dies quite soon in this. And the medic does get his moment where he says, "I don't want to die," being the one who jumps on the grenade and ends
Then
up
he does.
going through that. But I felt that they were background characters, and perhaps for the father and son. But that's just my opinion. I could be incorrect, but that's how I viewed it.
I mean, it's tough only because like I'm gonna give it a 1 regardless, like for sure. Like maybe it's like it flips, like again, like about I don't know 35% through the film, it starts the focus starts to turn more into onto Paul and David, right? Like I totally like can see that, like get that, and yeah, like
I mean, David even has a love arc.
sure, like sort of like a subplot there, like for sure. But like I don't know, like not that I don't know, like
Ian, you brought up a really good point, because once the father and son get separated, it then does become two stories. The father kind of goes off to his diminishing tale.
he takes the forefront for sure.
Like literally, when he's given the letter from his dad. Which,
yes, exactly, Chris. That's what I was gonna.
that kind of it really is kind of handing the baton, which then. But then, where does Norman fit into this? Is he then the third?
Here's the thing: is Paul died in Vietnam, even though he survived the war. He died when he killed Norman's character, and he was living as a ghost in America, and all the unfair things that happened to him afterwards. But he was looking for him to go. He was going back to Vietnam, I think, to die, because he wanted to die on his own terms. But I think also in the terms that he like. Part of the PTSD angle of it is that like he wanted the closure. He got the closure through Norman, and then he died on his terms to the Vietnamese shooting him, declaring, "No, I'm at peace." And just as he was forgiven, he kind of forgives them when they end up killing him.
Good, Steve-O.
I think that you're absolutely right about Paul being the 100% Paul is the main character. I see David and Otis as having like an equal importance. So if you want to call David a main character, I would also call Otis the main character.
I'll go with that.
Otis was the one with the
he has a daughter, he has a Vietnamese like woman that he had a fling with when he was there, and that's his connection. I could try to make an argument for all 6 of these guys being main characters, including Norman and including David and including, even Eddie and Melvin. I think that you're right, though. Like the real focus is on Paul, and then it goes down to like David and Otis. It doesn't matter who I'm going to really give this to.
I'm saying, however
I'm going to give this a 1, and I'm fairly certain, regardless of even if I give all 6 of them split duties on protagonist, I'll probably still give supporting a 1.
Yeah.
So I guess it doesn't really matter all that much in terms of the scoring, but I think you're right. Like there is certainly a hierarchy of like who are the protagonists of this, and like
I think it's
Paul, David and Otis, Eddie and Melvin underneath him, and perhaps Norman even underneath them. Just because like Norman is one-dimensional insofar as
For them,
he's just a memory in this. He's
Like
like
he's the ghosts that haunt.
yeah, exactly. He's not an actual character. He's a memory that these guys have, and very interestingly, and I think well depicted. This is going to go a little bit into style by the fact that when you go to the flashbacks, they are their old selves. They're like putting themselves into their own memories, and we'll talk about this a lot more in style because I have a lot to say about it. What worked about it and what maybe didn't in terms of that. But like, so Norman is almost. I would say that Norman's probably a supporting character.
I agree.
Just by dent to the fact that like, yeah, everything that they're doing going back is because of him initially, but that's all in their memory. This is not the story that's actually being told. It's just part of the remembering of what happened to them. And so that being said, it's a 1.
I mean, I guess this is going to go to supporting, but Norman, the reason Norman looks like he can do no wrong is because he's the ideal. He's not
mythologized, of course.
Yep.
Yes.
But he's also the ideal of everything that was lost when like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and all of them
like that
died as well.
aspect, yeah.
And all the promise that was lost.
Yeah, so I think that's a 1 for everybody, right?
Yep.
I like the fact that it's a sign of a quality movie that we're debating in detail how to who to distribute points amongst.
I agree.
The fact that there's arguments you made for all of them, or
Yeah.
And which brings us to Scott. Would you like to talk about supporting characters? Is there? Because I know.
I thought it was
Actually, yeah, I think
It should be Ian.
dialogue.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's E.
Sorry. That was me with protagonist. Sorry, I got caught up in the conversation. Ian, would you like to talk? Would you like to tell us about the supporting?
I would absolutely love to. So we already talked about Chadwick Boseman and did a fantastic job. I actually really love the portrayal of Vietnamese here, whether it's the dance walk or the tour guide that they had there.
Vin, I'm gonna jump in with names here. Vin,
yes.
played by Johnny Tree Nguyen.
And he did a phenomenal job. Also kind of playing the modern look into the repercussions of Vietnam. He wasn't directly involved with it, but his like parents and he has actually he's a good parallel for David because they both are facing the repercussions of what happened to the generation prior to them. And you're like and how can I forget all the lambs who are the group of Europeans. I think the one guy's American in there. Who,
Simon. So they are Hetty, Simon, and Seppo.
Who almost like a horror movie fodder that come in to beef up the cast in order to so that it adds an element of danger to things. They worked.
Throwback to one of our previous episodes, by the way. Hetty says Hetty like Hetty Lamar, and he's like, "What the fuck are you talking about?"
I don't know that. Yes.
Yeah.
It's very good.
I did too. It brought tears to my eyes. Actually, I did start crying because I'm like, they mentioned Hedy Lamarr, who's also a fantastic woman.
They sent it in there like very beautifully. Agreed.
Yeah.
But I feel overall, especially captured a very real scenario. It's felt like, at times, especially when they're filming the documentary footage themselves, like an actual like group of people traveling to this country back, and whether you're dealing with like the argument with the fisher, the chicken seller on the boat, and things like that, like there's a very real world they built. So I'm going to give it a 1 for that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I don't have much more to add, but yeah, like no matter how you slice it up, like whether or not you lump X character versus Y characters into either protagonists or secondaries you just talked about, it doesn't really matter in a sense because they're all really well fleshed out regardless, and all serve again the plot and or themes, or in a really organically done manner. So yeah, I gotta give everyone credit in this film. Like I guess there's 10 characters total, maybe like as a whole, but either way, I also am giving them a 1 and a lot of credit. And yeah, they fleshed out the world and made sense. Like never did I think like, oh, why is this character doing this? Why is this character even here? Like that thought never crossed my mind. I think it's a credit to the script and to the directing. So
Oh, by the way, I just have a quick digit. Chris, I'm very upset that you mentioned Spike Jones because that's all that goes through my head every time I mention the director. So I had to like, no, that's not the name. So
I don't know. He was like in the 90s around that time.
no, it's great. But
I feel you.
We would be remiss if we did not mention the portrayal of Hanoi Hannah in this movie.
So I was waiting for one of you to say that.
Phenomenal, like little like snippets in there, and like,
Yep.
man, what a like just addition to this movie in terms of like its kind of its take on Vietnam. I really was. Those were some of the other scenes that I was like, wow, this is some real shit. Like, you know, like trying just like getting transported to like what it must have been like a little bit to what it must have been like in that kind of situation, and hearing that type of stuff, you know, coming over the airwaves, because that was real. Like that shit happened. And
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Good
the thing
call,
is,
like,
it's
absolutely.
the truth. I mean, the thing was, it's like, yeah, she was feeding them material to demoralize them, but everything she was saying was actually the truth.
Technically, what's happening? Yes.
But by the same token, her government was doing the same thing. So, you know, in different ways, because they were being puppeted by, correct me if I'm wrong, the Chinese or the Russians or both.
What do you mean, the VC?
I'm not gonna weigh in on this because I don't know enough about it.
But because I thought it was an important thing that Hanoi Hannah had two people on either side of her, military. What I'm saying is,
Sure.
to me, and I don't know a lot about the politics. I don't want to like weigh in on like too much about what was going over there. But to me, it was very it hit. There was a symbolism there that I couldn't overlook. That it looked like,
no, certainly.
yeah,
You're
that's
absolutely right. Yeah.
the thing that I was addressing. Is my whole point.
Yep.
I'm
Good call.
giving supporting a 1.
Yep. 1 for me.
And I'd also be remiss if I didn't have to once again, like, gush over like Chadwick Boseman. I mean, like he's got like the world's greatest eyes. I've had like a crush on him since Civil War. I mean, he was like when I saw the trailer for this, I'm like, Chadwick's in it. I'd know those eyes everywhere, anywhere. Sorry, I'm gonna just say it. It's just
Yeah, no, fair
I
enough.
think it comes up on a style, but absolutely.
He's got a great
Chris-
presence.
Chris melts into Chadwick Boseman's eyes.
his eyes make me
I don't
melt.
blame you.
As many people do.
Hey, I
for sure.
would too.
Beautiful. And he's got cheekbones too, which the high cheekbones, which are another lovely, lovely feature. Okay, so
Oh my!
We're just gonna describe Chadwick Boseman for the rest of the episode.
sorry, it's like when I saw him in Civil War, I'd never seen him. Oh my God, who's? All right, so that's ones all around and supporting.
Yep.
Okay,
Mhm.
so moving off of Chadwick Boseman for a second, would you like to tell us about dialogue?
Oh, sir. So now it's me. Yeah. I mean, I'm giving a 1 on the outset. So there are only a few, like, not even that, like maybe like 3 times I thought like, the dialogue didn't work. But for the most part, like, again, it goes to the characters, goes to the acting, goes to the scripting, that I believe these were real. Like, they portrayed their rapport so well that like everything that was being said in any situation, again, like whether it's all of them, whether it was 2 or 3 of them, like whether it was Paul and his son David, like whatever situation was happening on screen, it was so believable, and I was immersed in it like throughout. So yeah, of course, I mean, I don't see if you guys make an argument for a 0, but like it's just that it wasn't like, I guess I don't know how to say this, like it wasn't in your face, but it was so perfectly spaced out that like I don't know.
Except they do the Spike Lee in your face.
Yes, I mean, but even that stuff, like even when, like it's just Paul in the camera, like sort of like making it like not a diatribe, like just making a
soliloquy.
yeah, a soliloquy, exactly, like a monologue in a sense. Like that stuff worked really well as well because you already knew who he was. The film set him up already, so it made sense like of him like just like sort of going through the jungle by himself, being like, yeah, this
Well,
is
he was also poisoned by a snake, so
it was
he's losing his
almost
fucking
in
mind.
the- yeah,
Soliloquy is just a good PR name for a diatribe.
Yeah.
Sure. That's like yeah, even that's like being like a fever dream from a snake bite. Like it all made sense. So, yeah, I don't have much more to say about it. Just that it worked really well, and I think again, it was both a credit to the scripting itself and the acting that elevated it. So That's all.
I'll say this: if I'm gonna give anything in this a 0, outside of like one taking a point off a plot, it's gonna be dialogue, and
Yep.
for this reason, there are many lines of very good dialogue in this. Some even like really, really good, but there are definitely a few, if not cringeworthy, nearly cringeworthy like parts of the dialogue.
And like missteps
found.
or something.
Just like so blatantly like obvious, or like not obvious isn't the right word,
like
but
bog
like
standard or something. Like, what do you mean?
no. It's never like Spike Lee's or any dialogue in a Spike Lee movie is never bog standard. It's just like it's either this is like so obvious that it's like Spike Lee makes his bread, I think, on like saying obvious things in a really interesting way.
Okay.
But when he makes mistakes in doing that, it's so obvious that it's just like, okay, Spike Lee. Like I almost want to go like, all right, okay, Spike Lee, we get what you're trying to say. Like you said it 3 minutes ago. You didn't have to go into a fucking like 5. Like sometimes those, I'm gonna call them diatribes, are like really powerful. Sometimes they're like, let's get on with the movie. You don't need to like, you don't need to harp on this, especially since like it's clear you're just saying the same thing kind of that you've already said.
Yeah, because he said it like 20 years ago and people still haven't listened.
Yeah, well, perhaps that's true. But like I guess the thing is like there is a lot of good monologue in this thing. There's some good dialoguing in this thing, and there's some like eye-rolling dialogue in this thing, I think I want to say. And like for that, I may give it a 0. I want to hear what the rest of you guys have to say about it.
Well, I didn't get a sense of that while watching this. So, I mean, it might have been there, but I didn't feel anything was out of place. And also, in a way, I go in knowing this is a Spike Lee film. And so I'm expecting this level of, or this kind of, not wordplay necessarily, but structure of the dialogue that goes into it. A lot of the things that, like, to me, that were eye rolling were actually narrative beats that went into there, like the Chekhov's landmine, things like that. But in general, like for instance, Pulver and Norman, the forgiveness scene, I thought was very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that oftentimes here, even if the dialogue was weaker, a lot of the performances elevated it to a height that I was very impressed. Like, again, I think that the I still don't remember names. The guy who played Paul. He did such a powerful performance, and he that like I'll forgive, and even his like over the top moments made sense for the fact that he's legitimately losing his mind over the course of this because of his past. I don't know. Overall, it worked for me on multiple levels. So
Yeah, sorry. Before you go, Chris, I see what you mean, Steve, but I feel like those moments were so few and far between that like in no way did it overpower like the actual like positive like good aspects of it were way more overpowering, like way more prevalent than anything that like felt like was dipping in quality. So
I guess if I can clarify really quickly, just I felt like the important scenes were done really well, and I felt like Delroy Lindo did a great job as Paul. But I felt like some of the small talk scenes between the guys
I get you.
were a little bit eye-rolling, cringy, like going overboard to like show what they were to each other, as opposed to like letting their own
they
camaraderie
didn't show they told.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of how it felt a little bit.
Sure, but I'm saying like it wasn't enough to like it was just only scattered through. So good, Chris.
Oh, sorry. So you're saying it's a little bit old dogs at times.
A little bit, yeah.
To me, the dialogue was the weakest when the film itself was the weakest during the more conventional scenes. I do know that like there was like one or two lines I thought, ooh. But I'm going to put it in context because when we reviewed, was it last week? Yeah, Uncut Gems. I gave dialogue a 0 because there's a couple cringeworthy scenes, but I pushed it over into style because I felt stylistically the dialogue was part of the flow of that movie. The reason I'm going to forgive the weaker parts in the dialogue in this movie is because I already took the point off in plot, because that weakest part of the movie contained the weakest dialogue. I'm with you, Ian. I mean, this is a story of a man who was broken, and 50 years later, he's fallen into decay. He's never been fixed. He's just, kind of a contradiction in a lot of ways. He's just very angry, and he does. And I mean, Delroy Lindo, I mean, he was amazing, because it's so funny, because they were giving him shit about being a Trump supporter, but like, you understood why he was angry, but then he'd contradict himself. I mean, it wasn't that he was losing his mind. It's just that he was directionless. He had no compass, and the only possible compass he could have had was his son, that he knew he neglected and wrote him a letter to, but was still holding on to this ideal that was Norman. So, so like, his dialogue and his delivery of his dialogue, I know we've mentioned this many times, but I really want to just add another layer of how impressive it was. But as far as everybody else, I felt the dialogue was very natural. To be honest with you, I really just wanted to hang out. Right. I knew they had some problems, but like, when like David, I wanted to hang out with David in a bar, it's just like, and a couple other, I felt this was a real world. I felt these were real people. I mean, but I wanted to join in on some of the conversations. Other conversations I had no business being in, but some of the conversations, I would have hung out with the Lamb people and David.
Just one point, I also like the blending of Vietnamese, English, and French, because that's realistically to how that country speaks. And
I give that to style. I think I'm gonna stick with 0 on this one. You guys are all giving it 1s?
Yes, I definitely am.
I think you were dead set in giving it 0 to something else.
I wasn't dead set. I could have been swayed on that one, perhaps, but it would have been a tough. It would have been a tough job.
All right.
Okay.
Leave me in, Chris.
I was going to say, Steve-O, keep talking, because you're into style, brother.
All right. So I absolutely love the style of this movie. I think that Spike Lee does a great job of depicting not only the current state of affairs with these guys going back to Vietnam, but like changing, not like, like when he goes back to the past, like changing to the square box, changing from the letter box to square box, changing the filters on all the cameras. That
wasn't a filter, dude. That was 16 millimeter.
I know. I'm sorry. I should not have said changing the filters. He filmed all the old stuff.
A different type of film, yes.
Yeah, he filmed all the old stuff in 16 millimeter. It just looked like an old film from
the Vietnam movie that you've come to expect. Yeah,
I thought Chadwick Boseman did a great job in this. Here's where I have an issue, the slightest issue with the style, and it's gonna be like, bear with me on this one, because I love this whole movie, but in terms of style, but I was trying to figure out why I couldn't like believe that these guys were hanging on Chadwick Boseman's every word. And I think that it's because they're all so much older than, like, like Chadwick Boseman's supposed to be their leader. And like, you see him like giving these impressive speeches. And I was like, I just don't believe this for some reason. I think it's because they're all so much older than him and know so much, like at this point in their life, like I see them as their older selves. And like, at this point they know so much more, that they hadn't grown up yet at the point they're supposed to be. So like, it's like this 20-year-old lecturing these like 50-year-olds on shit that they have been thinking about for their entire lives, Yeah,
but they were 18 years old at that point.
Yeah, but except for that, they weren't in the, in the movie depicts them as 65-year-olds, 70-year-olds.
Because Spike Lee demanded that they don't do either recasting or de-aging.
Oh, I know. And it's like, and I
and-
actually love that idea. Like, it's the opposite of the Irishman, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's like this. It's
So
like
you're gonna be
this great idea.
If they do Irishman, you're gonna hate it. If they go,
No,
Spike
I
Lee,
just like I can't, like, for some reason I can't take seriously the idea of a fucking 18, 20-year-old lecturing these fucking 55-year-olds on, like, their prescient current events that to these guys, like,
not lecturing on
It
current.
was an objective flashback. It was not an objective flashback. It was a subjective flashback.
it's not about it. It makes it subjective by the fact that they're all old and he's
Yeah,
young. It's looking at it through the eyes of, like, what you're seeing. It's
Yeah.
not looking at it through the eyes of what you're supposed to see.
But Norman never aged. They all did. So
I understand what the point of it was. You don't have to explain to me the point of it. I know why he did it, and I like the idea of doing that. The problem is that it is literally what you're seeing on screen is Chadwick Boseman is 26, but he's supposed to be playing like a 20-year-old lecturing these fucking 70-year-old dudes
I thought
about.
it was. I had the complete opposite reaction. I thought it was fantastic, and
I agree.
furthermore, a kind of a hammering home of the fact that these people are still in Vietnam, even though and the impression that they laid upon them through their entire lives, even though they grew older. Norman's still the ghost that they have to deal with.
I'm gonna back it up. Like, of course, like, that seems to be the obvious point. Like, that's the aesthetics that he was going for. That's why he chose, like, to do it that way. And yeah, Steve, maybe it's like a little, like, the juxtaposition is a little odd, but I think it worked. Like, I guess I'll say this: for the first scene, like, I think the first flashback was them in the helicopter, like the classic, like, Vietnam helicopter, right? And like Chadwick Boseman is Chadwick Boseman age, and like they're all. At first, I was like, "What's happening?" I was like, "Oh, I get it." And like every time it flashed back, like, it made sense. So like, yeah, it might be like a little off-putting, I guess, on the surface, but it made so much narrative sense and connected everything else together.
And thematic sense as well.
Well, yeah, exactly. So like, yeah, like I'm going to give it a 1, and like I want to speak about other things, like even I was gonna wait for one of you to bring up the soundtrack. Like, yeah, they use like some of the Vietnam songs that, of course, you've always heard your entire life.
Mhm.
But again, like in a way that like made it fresh, that didn't like just seem stale, like as a rote way to use the same songs you've ever heard.
And so much Marvin Gaye.
fucking time. Yeah.
So much Marvin Gaye. It was amazing.
And that
That's
was
awesome.
effective too. And like I remember, like, all right, so when the present day characters, like their 70-year-old selves or so, go to the little bar in Saigon, there's a DJ playing, and like in the background is, of course, like there's a big thing. It's Apocalypse Now, like in the background, like that got to me like as a good reference.
I do remember that the love affair that Spike Lee had with Apocalypse Now throughout
Yeah.
this, how this stylistically it influenced a lot of this. It was great as a film buff.
Yeah, so I'm giving it a lot of credit. Like, even though I see your point, Chris, Steve-O. Go, Chris.
I said he even used Ride of the Valkyries when they were
Mhm.
taking the riverboat.
Even that was like right. Even that was like somewhat subversive, I will say. Like, somewhat subverted in the way it was used. And like, of course, again, like you expect that to be used in every fucking Vietnam film you ever see, but it was like juxtaposed with a different scene. So yeah, all of that to me is evidence to give it a very strong 1. Even though I could see some of your like complaints, Steve-O, or like your like misgivings, but good.
Don't get me wrong. I was never even close to giving this a 0 for style. That was just like something that for whatever reason, I watch this. I get what they're going for. I understand exactly what he's trying to go for. I don't believe that Chadwick Boseman is like fucking inspiring, Delroy Lindo to fucking, whatever. But I will give them much credit for, as you guys mentioned, the soundtrack is amazing. All the allusions to Apocalypse Now are incredible. As I mentioned before, that Martin Luther King Jr. scene,
Yes.
incredible stylistically. Seeing Leon, wear a MAGA hat, fucking one of the craziest things I've ever seen in my life in terms of like just the weirdest juxtaposition ever.
He's a professional.
Yeah, he is a professional. I'll give him that. Just like a lot of like really interesting visual stuff, like really interesting audio. in terms of the soundtrack and stuff like that. I think that regardless of what Spike Lee decides to do for the rest of his career, his style is going to be his own, and is always going to be interesting. And yeah, I mean, I'm going to give style a very strong one. I just had to bring up that point.
You know what? I just one last thing is that I feel that your anger towards, or not anger, but like your discomfort with this is exactly my discomfort with the Irishman, because I had a very similar reaction. I just like I actually seeing flashbacks of the Irishman, how much I hated that. So
It's so interesting. Like when we were talking about it, I was like, yeah, like the scene with the very first scene where they're like getting out of the helicopter and like shooting at people is like, I imagine that if they were like, you know, putting young face, I guess, as the term, or not the term, but like, you know, if they were like fucking de-aged into this, like fucking, they're still like moving like old men like the entire time. And like, you know, it's like kind of hard to, it's kind of hard to say like, no, this guy could like, this guy is like 20 years old. He should be much more easily able to jump out of a fucking helicopter than this. But like, you know,
Lindo all of a sudden look like Robert De Niro. Oh, I'm sorry. We basically soft throws off.
it's so weird. But like, yeah, I still think I really like the idea of having these guys play themselves as younger characters as their older selves, because they're seeing themselves, you know, like at whatever age they are, right? Like,
one of the major points.
yeah.
I have to say there's two shots in here that I really wanted to, like, as far as I'm concerned, and please know this is with the most highest respect, that like fucking Spike Lee at this point can fucking shoot a television commercial and I'd fucking watch it. I mean, it's just, he's just so good.
I thought you were gonna say shoot someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue. So,
Oh God.
I thought that's where you're going with it. So no, I'm glad that you went that way.
The whole thing we were discussing, you know, with the aged actors versus Chadwick Boseman. Sorry, the four of you guys versus Chadwick Boseman, but there his as a filmmaker, he just never ceases to impress me of the things he does, the performances he gets, and he always has a unique way of approaching each film, but there's always a Spike Lee shot or two.
Yes.
And the first shot of David in front of the buffet, holding the glass, kind of looking down on him at like a 45-degree angle, and at the end where the one guy's with his daughter, and they have it where they're floating down them. He did it with two Spike Lee shots. I was just like,
yep.
Fucking hey, man, where would we be without those two shots of the Spike Lee joint?
Yeah. Freaking A. So one's all around.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And that leaves me with recommend, and hell fucking yes. Go see this goddamn movie. I just look, as we all said, we sometimes think that the script got in the way of what is otherwise an incredible character drama. I mean, even when it turns into an adventure gold movie, it's still like even better than most of those. I mean, and it's because of the strength of the characters and the development of it. I mean, it's not removed from everything we've seen before. It's just everything we've seen before is so strong that this all of a sudden becomes very conventional in a film that's not very conventional. But as all the issues, everything we discussed in this film, and it is with regard to the style and, you know, the things he brings up that are still pertinent today, and, you know, everything that my rant went into, which has been foremost in my mind watching this film, and which is why I cried a lot during this film. You know, this
Because of Chadwick Boseman's eyes.
Yeah, that was part of it. I saw Chadwick Boseman.
Also another reason he cried.
That's why I was melting into the couch. Yeah, it's a great movie. It is a really great movie. I highly recommend this movie. And Delroy Lindo, motherfucker, it knocks it out of the park. Him and Spike Lee just knocked this thing out of the park. So
yeah, I mean, absolutely agree. Yeah, number one, very strong recommend. Everyone should go see it. And like, it's sort of like, I don't know how to say this. Like, fortuitous and not like so. I believe it dropped on Netflix last week as of the date of this recording, and so we're doing it tonight, a week later. But like given of course the current cultural climate, like I think it's a good film to watch. But even like removed from all that, it's just a fucking really well done, put together film. That the latest Spike Lee joint that is as good as he's ever been, and like it deserves to be seen. And again, for everything we just talked about, so many aspects of it are so well done that fucking check it out.
Well, the beauty of creating a movie on race relations in America is it's always in vogue. You always come upon a time frame where it's pertinent. But I find it interesting because this is a critical darling. It's got, I think, a 91% on Rotten Tomatoes, and it's polarized everywhere else. Audience are really split on this. I happen to be in the camp. I guess I'm a critic now. If you said that, I enjoyed 2.5 hour film, and I felt much shorter than that. I was very engrossed with the storyline, even when it got more conventional. And I think it's well worth watching.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was quite good. I definitely recommend it. I would recommend most Spike Lee movies. I think this is kind of middle of the road in terms of Spike Lee movies, but that means it's better than most.
I haven't seen it.
Just in general.
It's not awesome, but that's okay.
What's that?
Didn't Spike Lee do a remake of Old Boy in America? Remake that I have not seen yet.
There was a remake of Old Boy. I don't know if he directed it actually, but I don't know. I don't remember how itself. I don't remember, Chris. Actually,
I'm going to shut up now because I might be wrong. I was wrong about Spike Jonze before. I'll be wrong about this. Go on, Steve-O. Sorry.
Now you're putting me in an awkward position. I want to know who did the remake. It was Spike Lee. I didn't see it. But of what I've seen Spike Lee's movies, this is kind of in the middle. Not the worst one I've seen, but not the best one I've seen. Like you can surely watch Do the Right Thing and Bamboozled and She's All That before. She's All That. Fucking, She's Gotta Have It before this. But
he did She's All That. Wow.
Jesus Christ. Take my reviewer fucking badge from me. But yeah, like this is a damn good movie and definitely well worth a watch. I'm gonna give it a 1. So
yep. Indeed.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, so that leaves us with we basically have one dissenter. We all gave it. Everybody but Steve-O get it for the 9 for all the same reasons. Steve-O thought that the dialogue was a little less than the 3 of us did, but otherwise, it looks like we have
3 9s and an 8. Then, right?
Yeah, so it's an 8.75.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's pretty spot on. Yeah,
that's math.
I mean, it's great. Yeah, a great Spike Lee joint. Check it out for sure. It's relevant and it's impactful, meaningful, powerful, and a really well done film. So, I don't know.
Definitely worth a watch.
To say?
Nope. I thought you were going to say something, Chris.
Nope. Everybody, thank you very much for joining us. I've been Chris Morgan here with Stephen Hermosi.
I'm gonna go dig up the gold from my closet.
Jonathan Ian Manzer.
What's my name? Norman the Doorman. Even rhymes.
And Scott Thurlow.
The horror, as always.
And let's bring some understanding here today. Good night, all.
Editing and engineering by Christopher Morgan. Music by Christopher Morgan. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates. Or Mott's?